And I've been at enSilo for about 6 months. Before that, I spent about 10 years in AV, spent several years in IT, spent several years in telco. So, needless to say, geek at heart. So I want to give a hat tip to the guys who actually did this research. Yudi and Tomer, they're our co-founders, and incredibly great guys, incredibly smart guys, and this is their research that I'm presenting. And because it's Friday, everybody needs a cat better, right? Yes. So, hooking in a nutshell. So, what is hooking? So we're basically just jacking in to a program so that we can alter it or we can augment it in some way. And there are several different ways to do this. We focus specifically on inline DLL hooking and user level hooking, because that's the most common and what we generally see in real life versus kernel. So I'm going to review that. We saw this in a lot of different products. We saw it in a lot of the anti-exploitation. We saw it in, of course, anti-malware. Well, we also saw it in products such as AppV from Microsoft and a lot of other products. So, and of course, bears mentioning malware. So, private joke here, I'm an avid crocheter, and these are actually inline hooks versus a tapered hook. So, inline hooking, it's pretty straightforward, right? You start with disassembling your prologue, you allocate the code space, copy the prologue code bytes over, and then you patch the prologue with a jump. So, 5 bytes, you have your jump, and then your D word, pretty straightforward. So just so you can see it, we have the code up here, and then that's with the hook embedded. Pretty simple, right? No problem. Now, this is just one of the inline hooking techniques that we saw. We've also looked at a lot of one-byte patching that's common in malware. So it writes a bad jump so that it gets caught in the exception handler. We looked at detours with the 2-byte patching. So we looked at all of this type of stuff, right? Problem is, you can get some problems with this because of the relative jumps. What happens if you jump and you don't end up where you expect? What happens if it's a really short prologue and you've just overwritten half of it by doing this jump? And there's a couple of other problems like that, where you can completely host the program. 64-bit. Now, 64-bit is kind of an interesting thing because the 5-byte jump, it's got a 2 gig limit. So, in the 32-bit program, not so bad. 64-bit, not so good because a lot of them are bigger than 2 gig. So, they came up with the trampoline code. So still works pretty much the same, just allows you to bounce further into the code so you can still do the hooking. Again, pretty much the same thing. You break up the quad word into D words, still do the jumps, still flows reasonably well, but you still run into some of the same problems that you can have with the 32-bit. Relative jumps are wrong. You can jump to the wrong place, break the program. So that's just what the original code function looked like when we followed it along. So that's what I mean. Reasonably simple, reasonably straightforward. It's the most common hooking technique that we saw in most of the products. A little bit more about it if you want to read a little bit more about it. But it really is an intrusive way of hooking into a program because you're modifying the original program. However, that's what most people tend to do. Unfortunately, because of some of this, it also means, because this is vulnerable, endpoint security are also vulnerable. So, I just didn't want my cat people. I didn't want to dog people left out. So So, what we really looked at was the kernel to user code injection, because that's the most common way of doing this. Jack into a DLL, calls that DLL, off you go. This is also how sandbox escapes work, because they can use the text and hop right on out of the sandbox, use the exploit. You can get into protected processes this way. This is used on both sides of the fence. We've seen, how many security researchers we got in here? How many of y'all have seen this one? This is just ridiculously common, where they jump in and out like that. It is a little bit tougher than user mode. We were looking at Citrix the other day, and they have this beautifully documented hooking system, all user mode. It's wonderful, documented, great, and then not so much on the kernel side of things. So when we were looking at the injection methods, we divided them up into just kind of basic categories. How can we exploit things? This is the most common, and that's the user asynchronous process calls. It's used by a lot of malware, particularly rootkits, but it's also used in security products. Hooray! So AVG has it, Kaspersky. This is pretty well documented, but it does mean that you can easily exploit this stuff and not know it. Because that's the whole point of rootkit, you don't know. So this is a little more stealthy. This is a basic way of doing it. There's plenty of other different ways, but this is just the basic, easy way of doing it. But yes, you can replace a bunch of these register calls with whatever you would like, but premise still holds. Check in, you just now own that program. The entry point one is a little bit different because it was not a common technique, because if you munch the entry point, you will break everything. So Dooku used this, and that was actually what tipped everybody off on Dooku. Patch the entry point, change the hash. All the AV started flagging it, going, this is suspicious because the entry point changed. Code, hash change, something's wrong. When they researched, it was kind of neat how it did it. It had an identity, so it had an ID, took the ID, took the original entry point, and took the hash. And it saved those registers so it could go back to it later, but then hacked in the services.exe in between two of the commands. And completely owned it. But still worked because it kept the entry point. This is actually quite cool. This is a little bit more advanced. We did a talk on this called codeless code injections. We had not seen much of this for us until about a month ago. And we've actually seen an example of this in the wild that was causing infections. So what it did, just as it sounds, it's not downloading a dropper to execute the code, it's downloading a way to patch into something. So it's downloading instructions and patching straight in. No code. So this is a bit of a, for this particular one, it bypassed AV because there was nothing coming down that would be that suspicious. Funnily enough, these are the vendors that use this same technique, codeless code injection. Which means, when you're looking at it in memory and it's hooking in, if something is trying to interfere with it, malware, it's very difficult to find these to shut them off. Can't break the hook. So that's the reason why you would use something like this. And if you don't want to do the import, you can use the TLS data directory. It still would probably work. Now this is the most common way malware likes to work. Bust into DLL, elevate the privileges, off we go. This is a very, very simple way. Yes, there's lots and lots and lots of ways to do this. This is just one example, but it hooks very nicely. So the kernel to user injection extensively used on both sides of the fence because everybody's trying to either evade detection or keep themselves from getting shut off. Persistence is key. So, unfortunately, it's very prone to mistakes, and that's what we were seeing. This little guy is a Roadhog from Overwatch. And the reason why I put him up there is because games also sometimes have trouble with hooking engines. They had a particular problem with EasyHook because of the way it was hooking into a game booster. And it was flagging all over the place, and they were having a lot of problems. So even the gaming industry is not immune to some of this hooking problem. So when Tomer and Udi started looking at this stuff, they originally thought it wasn't that bad. Unusual, but not bad. And as they started digging, it kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So we've actually found 6 categories of varying degrees of severity. All the vendors have been notified. So this is the very first one. All Windows versions have this problem. All of them, that includes Windows 10. Bad DLL injection, because of how they're injecting in, it's leaving it unprotected. This is another big one that was seen. Read, write, executable code stubs. Now, I'm not sure why you would want to leave a code stub in that state, but they have. And it's predictable where the pointers are. They're constant. All Windows versions have this too. But this also means shellcode can write that address in. Yay, Windows, right? So we had this, but we also saw it in AV vendors. This one was a little less severe. It didn't leave it in a writable state, but it still could execute. So again, it's an ASLR bypass because it still contains the code, the address of that critical piece. It can bypass hooking altogether. So now you can still not necessarily write to it, but it is very easy to execute any malicious code. This one at least was a little bit further down the list. It was Windows 7 and below, but from what we've seen, a lot of people still use Windows 7. Not everybody has bothered to upgrade yet. It's still very similar. It's not quite as bad because it is the code stuff, but still, this is not good. We don't like read-write executable code segments. This is another one that was in all Windows versions. The control flow guard bypass. You get right past it with this. And even though you can, you're leaving your hook, so this is like for the AV, they're hooking in that particular hook code is now read-write executable. It may not be in a persistent place, but it can easily be found and easily be bypassed. And then you can execute whatever you would like. And again, the hooked module. So instead of the hooking engine being read-write executable, now we've just left the whole bloody program read-write executable. That's not good. You shall know to completely own this. So this is what we found. And as you can see, it's pretty much all of Windows. Lots of AV as well. Any questions so far? Yeah.
Doesn't hooking these functions already require administrator privileges?
As long as the user code has already in a state that it can be altered, you're free to go.
And which process is this?
Most of them. User 32 and TTLO, as long as they are in a user-ready state, they can be hooked. That's why a lot of stuff can actually be written, even if, as power users. PowerShell can do a lot of this without elevating privilege.
Right. So this allows access to the entire process.
Does
that elevate to administrator?
Not that we saw. Didn't have
Okay.
to.
Users can already debug their own programs without any special stuff, yes?
Mm-hmm. They can, but we were showing how malware can do it too and inject in. And you'll see that in my demo. The demo is just a straight user machine. It does not have admin privileges. It's just a straight run. Speaking of the demo, yes, my Mario Mushroom Cloud. My son is a huge fan of Mario, so had to be done. So what we're using TrendMicro as an example. And the reason why we're using them is because they have already prepared this. So again, we're using Trend as the API in question, and it will be hooking into Adobe Reader. So what we're doing is showing you debug. We're going to show the Adobe Reader process here, and we're going to view it in memory. This is just standard Adobe Reader, nothing special. It's a little bit of an older version. So we're looking at it in memory. We're going to scroll down a little ways here because we want to show, if you look carefully, it's in a read-write state, read-write execute state. So now this is the actual hooking stuff from Trend. So when we look at it in this assembly, look at all of this space. That is perfect to drop code in, which is what we're going to do. So we crafted we made a script here to create a PDF. it's sitting on the desktop and it's ready to go. And what we're going to do here is we're going to go back into our debugger for a second. We're going to watch as we load that PDF what exactly happens. One of the things that Adobe Reader has a vulnerability in is their gadgets. There's a particular DLL that has a vulnerability for the gadgets, and that's what we're exploiting in this, more specifically. So now we're going to watch as we load the PDF. So we're getting ready to open it. It's doing the standard thing, scrolling through. And we're going to pull that PDF right off the desktop. Now what we want to do before we open it is hook that DLL. This is the one for the gadgets. So we're going to set a breakpoint here so we can watch exactly what happens. So here we go. We're going to load it up. This is stuff that users do every day. They click on stuff all the time. They have no idea what it's doing in the background. So this is why it's actually kind of fun actually seeing what it's doing here. So this is opening. We're just going to wait until it hits that breakpoint. Should be happening here shortly. Okay, so now we've hit the breakpoint. So now we want to watch what happens as we copy that code in to the gadgets. So what we're doing is we're going to find the first gadget. We're going to let it run until we hit that breakpoint. Make sure you get rid of the original breakpoint first. I've actually forgotten to do that on more than one occasion. It drives me nuts when I'm trying to debug. Alright, so we hit the breakpoint. So now is the opportunity to start stepping through and actually watch the code be injected in. So now we're going to start stepping through until we hit this, until we hit that hook stuff. So now we found it. There's our little stub there. There's our AV stub. Not all that nice free space. Remember we just saw that? So we hit our next step. There's our code. So it's copied it in quite happily into all that slack space. And then we can finish. We're going to finish stepping through the code to watch it execute. And because we're nice researchers, we only had it at the calc. But we didn't have to. Fun stuff, huh? So, we decided then to look at what third-party engines are vulnerable. The story behind Mr. Potato Heads. I used to explain AV to people using Mr. Potato Heads. And it's actually a really great methodology to teach people what viruses are and how you can detect them. But anyway, we know that developing a hooking engine is tough. Not many people like to do it. It's very labor intensive, it's very time consuming. That's why we want to go and get third-party engines, because they've already done the work for us. And they integrate much easier. Now, the problem is a security issue in a hooking engine means you have to patch all of the programs that use this hooking engine. That's no small task. EasyHook is one of the ones that we solved the problem. You know, it does all this nice little stuff, but it also leaves the code book stubs and read writable and the modules. It also has some bad coding practices that we saw, that it uses non-heap and changes parts of code. That's kind of bad. So now we know that one's a problem. Deveyer 2 is as well. So there's your open source ones. It also has the read-write hook steps. Mad code hook. So now we're up into commercial grade. You would think this would work. Nope. And I know lots of security vendors use this. My previous employer, I know full well we use Mad code hook. So now 75% of the vendors have this problem. Detours. They're not immune either. You would think for $10,000 this would be etched in stone, bulletproof, but it isn't. Because they show you exactly where they're going to be. It's pretty cool. We couldn't get too much into detours and all of the things that we found because we were waiting for them to release the patch, and the patch did get delayed by about a month. So unfortunately, I can't get into as much depth because they literally just put the patch out. So as we are now able to, we can get into more detail with it. But look at the ramifications. So just to show, and this was just in our little pool of research. We only did about a dozen security vendors, give or take. Yeah. Most of them had multiple problems. So Trend had 3 of the 6, half of the problems that we saw. And we have a few. This is why we haven't mentioned them. They haven't fixed it yet. A couple of them fixed them on their own independently, and then everybody else, you can see the time to fix. So one of the things that our guys did was they actually made some research tools, so you can actually look to see if you've got this problem either on your own network or in your own code. So it's readily available on GitHub. Anybody can access it, it's free. But it shows if you have any of the read-write stuff, read-write executable stuff. They also use this one, scan, and it does a pretty decent job of telling you where things are going to pop. So it's a double-edged sword. You need the hooking to augment functionality, but we haven't seen ways where it's quite as secure. So there's a lot of security implications of doing this. And almost all of the vendors that we saw were vulnerable at least to one. So I appreciate your attention, especially since this is the last one of the day. Does anyone have any questions? Everybody else scared you now? All right, well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.